Hello and welcome. My name is Kathleen, and today we're going to talk about how I trained for and ultimately ran a 100-mile ultramarathon. I have paper notes of all the runs I did leading up to the race, and I'll let you know what worked and what didn't and what you could implement in your own training plan.
Okay, let's go.
So for backstory, the year before, I ran a 50-mile ultramarathon, and at the time when I finished, I thought there's no way I could do one more mile. But of course, once I healed, the running bug was back, and I kept thinking, what on earth would it feel like to run 100 miles, and do I have what it takes?
I'm sorry, what are you talking about?
There's something interesting about that running bug that just will not relent once you get that question in your mind. And so ultimately the next year I decided to go ahead and increase my goals from the 50 miler straight to the 100 miler. I didn't even want to bother with the 100K because it was so close to the 50-mile mark that it didn't quite scratch the itch of the unknown and what my limits are. There's something about pushing your limits and expanding your comfort zone that I'm addicted to. The year before the 50 miler was my first 50K. My training up to the 50K, my peak run was a marathon. And then for the 50 miler, my peak runs were supposed to be a marathon and a 50K, but my half marathon after the marathon, while I was out on the trail, I sadly had this big pop in my foot. Turned out I had subluxed my cuboid and subsequently sprained my ankle. So it meant 3 weeks of very little running, little to no running. So I was able to rally, get a couple more 20-mile runs in, upper teens, but could not run the 50K. So my highest run, that training block, was the marathon, and that was my peak run. So for the 100-miler, I thought, man, I was able to run a 50-miler on a peak run of a marathon, but what on earth do you even need for the marathon? So I had kind of had in my head a marathon and 2 to 3 50Ks. So for those who don't know, a 50K is 31 miles. For this 100-mile, what I wanted to do was use a 24-hour race that's near my house-ish. It's a couple hours away, but that's pretty close. I didn't have to stay in a hotel the night before. And instead of running 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. like they say, I was like, I'll just start really, really early in the morning and then go as late after the finish line at 8 a.m. the next day as needed to hit the 100 miles because I wanted to make sure I could get it done. And I didn't want to have to add navigation and then crew checkpoints. I'm a mom of young boys. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. At that time, they would have been 2 and 4. So there was just no way that I could ask my husband to cart my kids to all these different checkpoints. So they showed up to the race grounds, which was a looped course. And then during the 100, they saw a little bit the evening before, went and slept at an Airbnb nearby, came back by a little bit in the morning, and then they went to church. And I just plugged away until I finished. And then I was able to go back to the Airbnb and rest while they were all still gone at church. And as a mom, it was kind of nice to not be immediately needed when I finished, so it worked. But for all those logistical reasons, this looped race course seemed the easiest because I could crew myself. So a good running partner and friend of mine, Rebecca, did crew me. She came and ran lots of it with me. She ended up getting a 50K during my 100-miler. Because she put in so many miles with me. So that was absolutely incredible that she put in 31 miles with me. And then the rest I ran with people who were doing the looped course. Now, if you're new here, I would just like to say, please help that algorithm out and make them realize that I'm a nice person. It's AI and has no way to know that I'm worth watching unless you tell it to. So please like, share, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And the rest I ran with people who were doing the looped course. Because the good thing about that is if my pace doesn't perfectly match yours the whole race, that's fine. We can do a mile together and then split off. So I may lower my pace in order to be with you, or you may lower your pace in order to be with me. But at the end of the day, it's only a mile. We can pick back up. So anyway, that's the race I had picked. And it was end of September. So my training kind of began, you could say, in April. I started working on my 5K PR. I wanted to get some speed done before I took on my long distance training. So April was all shorter runs, nothing longer than 5 miles, but I was doing a lot of interval runs. This is the first time I really tried working in speed, and that was a good base. From there, in May, I increased to a 7-mile run. Again, this is zone 2 training at this point, so I wasn't necessarily doing the interval runs on my long runs. I trained on 3 runs a week, and I know that would not work for everyone, but that is what worked for me. So on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I had my runs, and then all the other days I had strength and walk. During my 100-mile ultra training, I also completed 75 hard. So I did double days a ton of this time, but a lot of it was walking. I was basically not letting my body be sedentary. If my kids were napping, I was walking loops of my driveway. If my kids were awake, I took them to the park and I was walking laps of the park. If I could, I'd put them in the stroller and take them for a walk. So that was really common. And then on Saturday, sometimes even after my long run, we'd still go for a hike.
Why?
I did not stop moving, and that's, I think, the key to ultramarathon training is just telling your body, don't relent. Do not relent. Press on. My husband describes it as having a hard forehead and just like slamming it in, like not giving up, like just pressing on. We use that in our faith sometimes. Just, I will press on to know the Lord even in the midst of difficult circumstances, and that's the gift of endurance. And endurance is what begets character. Character is its son. So for me, as I'm training and building up these miles and not letting my body rest, I was kind of thinking of the symbolism behind it all. Endurance is hard, but it's also a gift. Do you know what I mean? So I also did a lot on my stationary bike for the first several months. Part of me was kind of thinking, well, what if I kind of did a DIY Ironman as one of my ultra runs preparing for the 100-miler? But ultimately, the stationary bike was just tweaking my knee. I'm a very tall person. I'm doing this in my basement, having to hunch a bit. Don't think I have everything aligned right with my bike. And that knee path just wasn't perfect, and ultimately it just really contributed to a lot of knee pain. So the first month, May, I ran 116 miles, just barely introduced the cycling, and did 20 strength workouts, which is a lot. That's almost 5 a week, 4 to 5 a week. So this was just that beginning. This was just that ramp up. May was a really slow start for me. I feel I was also sick one of those weekends, so my longest run I'm seeing was 10 miles. So in May, kind of pushed past that 5K prep that was April. My longest run was 5 miles. May, I built that up, did 7 miles, 10 miles, etc. So actually my 10-mile run was symbolic. So my brother passed away May 27th, and May 27th, 2024 was the 10-year anniversary of when he passed away. He passed away in the VA on Memorial Day. So it's always just really painful, and I just needed something to remember him by. So I was intentionally wanting to hit that 10-mile mark on that Monday. My husband was off and was able to watch the kids. So I don't normally do a long run midweek. But yeah, I felt that run was really symbolic, and it was really painful, but in a good way. It kind of gave me the outlet that I needed. So in June, I did 18 strength workouts, so still hitting strength pretty good. I did 120 miles on the bike. Again, this ended up getting cut back. When was that? Yeah, so the very next month I started dropping the bike. But for June, I'm still hitting the bike heavy. Did 120 miles on the bike, and then 140 miles on my feet. So some of that was runs and some of that was walks. I do consider both good training for ultras, because you do hike the uphills and then run the straights and the downs. And if your heart rate is too high, you run or you walk in order to bring it down. So kind of that power hike. I'm doing that. All of these miles, most of these miles, we're pushing the double jogging stroller and 100 pounds worth of boy, worth of my boys. So it was by no means a leisurely stroll. And some of it was in the mountains. I live in Colorado, so there's a lot of elevation. But so after the 10K, I went down to, or after the 10 mile, I went down as far as long run goes to an 8 mile, back up to a 9.1, from there up again to 13, from there maintained that again with another 13. So those, my goal was in June to build from that newbie 10 mile mark up to able to maintain a half marathon. For me, the way I like to block my training is I'll increase it and then have a bit of a down week. But once I get past that half marathon mark, my down week is the half marathon. So you'll see a lot of half marathons from this point out. The amount of half marathons I have run over the last 3 years while training for ultras is bizarre. And it's wild that right now my long runs are 5 miles, and so a half marathon sounds like a long way, but when your long runs are 31 miles, a half marathon sounds like a break. I was also still doing a lot of strength, push-pull legs, upper lower, to get 5 a day. But later on in my training cycle, there's a video by Jeff Nippard, How to Train as a Minimalist, I think is the name of the video. And I kind of thought of them as an A day and a B day. So later on in my training cycle, when I cut down on strength, I didn't want to lose strength. So I did those A and B days. So if I did 3 workouts a week, it was A, B, A, or the next week, B, A, B. So I was always doing full body 3 days a week, and that taught me how to run on tired legs. That kept a lot of my strength and made sure I was hitting all of my muscle groups. As far as June goes, I was still doing like the push-pull leg split. July, I only did 52 miles on the bike, which is a big drop from 120 because I just found that was irritating my knee. So I went from the half marathon at the end of June up to a 15 mile, then an 18 mile, and then 21 miles. After the 21 mile run, I went and walked 2.5 miles with my family. It was a hike. And then the next week dropped down to a half marathon. So this is when I said the half marathon becomes my break. So that was the end of July. So it took me up to 21 miles, but then back down to 13. I started to taper down on those interval runs. Maybe I made them a bit progressive. I do see one progressive run, but for the most part, I started to focus more on zone 2 training and rested my knee because I felt like that had irritated it. As far as strength workouts, it was 13. So again, that's a drop from 20 in May and 18 in June. I dropped it down to 13 strength workouts in July. And then as far as total goes, again, June, my totals was 138 miles. July, my total miles on foot was 200 miles. So I'm steadily increasing my mileage. My longest week that month was 52 miles. That was with a 21 mile long run, and then the rest being the other 2 runs and all the walks, a lot of walks. Yes, moving on to August, I increased from the 200 miles to a total of 215 miles. So a much more modest increase, and 11 strength workouts, and then 0 on the bike. So that was a big change. My first long run of August was a marathon. Right after the marathon, I went on a 2.5 mile hike with my family. So again, just not relenting, not letting my body rest, teaching it to push on. So my other 2 runs that week were 2 5-mile runs, both back to back with walks. One of the days was a 2-mile walk, one of the days was a 4-mile walk, and all the other days, no less than 2 miles walking, but usually more between the 3 and 5 miles walked. So I walked constantly this summer. I did not stop moving. From the marathon, my down week was a half marathon, and then I did a small taper. I would say you almost couldn't call it a taper because my weekly mileage was still 58 miles that week, but it culminated and ended with, on that Saturday, my first 50K. So mid-August, I ran 31 miles, and then just a short walk after that with my family to the park. After that, we went to Arkansas to visit family. We're from the Midwest. And so I stayed active, but it was more of like 20-minute workouts, 2 miles walked. The longest thing I did that whole week was a 7-mile walk with just a few minutes running in between to kind of just test my legs out. But as soon as we got back from Arkansas, which was about a 10-day trip, I did a 4-mile run, a 3-mile run, and then another 50K. So the weekends, right smack dab in the middle of August and the last week of August, I did 2 50Ks. So August was huge. A marathon and 2 50Ks all in one calendar month. That's a huge month. So that's kind of why you see the mileage didn't necessarily jump up big. It went from 200 to 215, but it's because I started putting all that mileage in one chunk of time and giving myself a little bit of rest in between. I didn't rest. I walked every single day, but you can kind of see what I'm getting at. I was giving my body a bit more time to recover while still building my long runs. Kathleen from the future here. I realized I did not clarify these 50Ks. The first one was with a local running group. My friend Erica, who was my running partner that summer, put it together. We did an out and back, and so the runners could pick their distance, but we all had a local crew stop from all of our vehicles, and then we felt more safe running early in the morning and for a long period of time because we were all running together. Afterwards, we went and had Chick-fil-A, so it was just a really great day. That second 50K, she and I ran part of it together, and then she was done because the 50K we did all together was her last of the season. So we ran, I think, a good 20 miles, something like that, together. And then she went off, and then I went and did another 4 or 5 miles by myself, met up with another friend, had a donut, and then wrapped up the last chunk to make it a 31-mile long run. And then my third and final 50-kilometer run, which was in September, I'm about to get there. That run, I wanted to work more so on mental resilience, and I knew I would be running the whole thing by myself because Erica's 100-miler was end of August, so she was done. So that 50-kilometer run I did by myself on the treadmill. The reason I did it on the treadmill was to not have to prep my pack, not have to worry about sunscreen, not have to carry about all my nutrition. I had easy water access to refill. I could run safely by myself. So there was a lot of benefits, but then the hard part was I was on a treadmill for 31 miles. And so kind of building up the mental strength while still giving myself a bit of a change of pace since I knew I was going to be completely alone for that 50 kilometers. So did want to just add that in. So September, after that 50K the last week of August, the first week of September, I did an 18-mile run. So I did not drop all the way down to the marathon. I wanted to maintain some of that intensity, maintain some of that volume. The very next week, I did another 50K. Again, this is all with the other miles, right? So my total weekly mileage for the second week of September was 67 miles. That was my peak week during training, unless you count the week of the race itself, which was 126.5 miles. The longest I've ever run in any week. If you guys follow Andrew Glaze on social media, he is a fireman who talks about the benefits of long runs and endurance training to help with the mental health struggles that a lot of firemen and service professionals face. He runs 100 miles a week, every single week. That's his running streak. I can't even imagine because I've only ever had 1 week where I ran more than 100 miles, and it was my 100-mile ultramarathon week. So those miles were all in 2 days. So I just don't understand how he can do it all the time. But anyway, that last 50K, my peak week mileage during training was 67 miles. So from there, I tapered. I only did a 2-week taper. Honestly, I have found that my body responds best to shorter tapers. 2 weeks, I think, is pretty short considering how intense I built up my mileage. A lot of people do 3-week tapers, but I did that for one of my races and felt like I'd almost lost some of my training, and I did not like that feeling. I didn't like the insecurity that it brought me either. I wanted to feel sharp while still feeling well rested, and to me that balance was a 2-week taper. So my longest run in those 2 weeks was 10 miles. So I distinctly dropped it from the half marathon, that was my base run, my break run, down to 10. I didn't want to do the full half marathon in that week in between the 50K and the 100 miler. I wanted it to be a bit more relaxed. And then in the 2 days before the 100 miler, I did a 5.5 mile walk. I did not run that day when I normally would have. And then the next day was full rest. So the day before my 100 miler, I did absolutely nothing. And September is the only time I really did rest days, because remember, I was doing 75 hard, I was doing a lot of double days. So for me, a rest day was walking 2.5 to 3 miles. But during September, in order to balance the intensity of these long runs, all these 50Ks, with not breaking something or having a stress fracture, I incorporated a bit more rest. So at the end of September, I ran my 100-mile ultramarathon. During the race, remember, it was a 24-hour race, 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. I started hours early. So I drove up in the middle of the night by myself, and I was 18 miles into my 100 miles before this race ever started at 8 a.m. I did that intentionally so that I wouldn't finish too late in the heat the next day. And I knew you never sleep well the night before a race anyway.
Am I right or am I right or am I right?
And even though I started 18 miles deep, I still got second in my age group and 5th female overall, which I think just goes to show I did that with legs that, like, everyone else started at the start line completely fresh, and I started at the start line 18 miles in. So pretty exhausted, but I still ranked really well. And I think that just goes to show that my training block went well that year. I feel like out of the 3 years I've put in training for ultras, this was the best training block I've had. Now, I don't necessarily think you need a marathon and 3 50Ks to run 100 miles. I think I needed it to run my first 100 miles. Same with my first 50K 3 years ago. My longest run was a marathon. I don't think you need to run 26 miles during training for a 31-mile run. Granted, mine was 35, but 34. But all that to say, I did want to feel prepared, and I feel like that summer of intense running, never stopping, teaching my body, okay, you've stopped and had lunch. Now, while your kids are napping, get up and go again. Your kids are awake from nap, get up and go again. Come home, have dinner, get out again with your family in the evening, go for a walk. Like, I did not stop moving, which is why every day I was able to rake in all those miles, even if it was only 3 runs a week. And I think that's why I maintained an injury-free training cycle, was because so much of it was walking. And later on, once I had added all that intense volume of these 50Ks, I incorporated rest days. So I think the key takeaway is listening to your body. With the cycling, I recognized that was tweaking my knee. I took that out. As my runs ramped up that last month, I decreased my strength training. Oh, that was something I forgot to say. So in August, I had 11 strength workouts. And in September, I had 7 strength workouts. That's it. So you can see I drastically dropped how much I was lifting in the gym in order to give my body a little bit more rest while still maintaining muscle mass. I also think that muscle mass is what helped prevent injury. Teaching your body to maintain good form under a lot of load with the weights in the gym, I think translates well onto the track or onto the trails whenever you are teaching it to maintain good form through a crazy high number of reps, if that makes sense. Also, muscle mass protects your bones, and we don't want stress fractures. Another thing that prevents injury during ultra training is nutrition. Eat a lot, eat enough. Don't restrict calories, especially when you hit those peak weeks. Give your body enough fuel. Do not be afraid of carb loading. And then practice your nutrition during long runs. For me, I just think GOOs are a little bit of a waste of money, and often don't settle well on the stomach. So I do incorporate them a little bit, but most of the time it's calorie dense foods. Think of all the junk food that you grew up eating or you eat on road trips. Now's the time to actually eat it because you're going to be expending all of that energy. So if there was a candy I ever thought was yummy, this is the time to eat it. And then later on in the race, if nausea hit, I started sticking to boiled potatoes, a lot of white tortillas. They just soak up all the juices in your stomach, stop that sloshing around, and settle it really well. If any of you guys are ladies listening, I just want to say I think ladies are in particularly gifted when it comes to endurance sports because one, we have more slow twitch muscle fibers, which makes it easier for us to go slow for a really long period of time versus that fast twitch 5K time. I think it's still good to work on both, but it's in your favor that we have more slow twitch muscle fibers when you think about endurance sports. Also, every single month, we are living life through cramps. We can ignore pain. You want me to run a marathon while my legs are cramping? Done. I train for this every month. Also, running while you're nauseous. If you've ever been pregnant, you know exactly what I'm talking about, especially if it was a subsequent pregnancy and you're chasing your toddler while you're pregnant. You can do a lot while you're nauseous because you learn to live with it.
I'm losing control and it feels like all this food just wants to come out.
So being nauseous in the middle of the night during an ultramarathon, it's like, no. Give me some ramen, give me a white tortilla, give me some processed carbs, and I will be just fine. So to all you ladies, don't second guess yourself. I think we are in particularly gifted and prepared for endurance sports. I obviously incorporated a lot of electrolytes. My pack itself just had plain water, and then I had electrolytes in a shaker bottle and would just stop and drink some every so often. And then I don't really like electrolyte chews. You just have to eat so many of them that it just doesn't seem beneficial. And a lot of people steer away from caffeine because they're worried that caffeine will dehydrate you, but it's only in big quantities, because if you're drinking something that's caffeinated, like a cup of coffee, it has enough water in it that you're not getting dehydrated ultimately, because you're balancing that out with how much water you're drinking in the cup of coffee. For me, I did a few caffeine gels, but that's such a minimal amount of caffeine that it didn't really help. But in the middle of the night is when I started to really try the caffeine a bit more. I had 1 cup of coffee, but it just didn't set well on my stomach. And then at 3 in the morning, I pulled out some Nerds clusters and a Celsius. It was my first ever time having a Celsius. And I'll tell you, nothing hits like a Celsius at 3 a.m. when you are 70 miles deep into an ultramarathon. It hit spot. I absolutely loved it, and it gave me a fresh burst of energy. It felt like a party walking along with my pacer and another gal, Amanda, in the middle of the night, and it was just like a fresh start. And then at mile 90, again, this is hours later, I had my second and last Celsius, and I ran the next 4 miles. At mile 90, it was 4 or 5 miles. At mile 90, I was dead. I was a zombie. But that Celsius revived me, and I was able to get a few more miles in. So I held off on real true caffeine until the absolute end of the race, once I was past that 100K mark. And everything else was just little bits here and there, you know, a swig of Coke. My husband brought me a Diet Dr. Pepper from Chick-fil-A when they came. And not a Diet Dr. Pepper, an actual Dr. Pepper. I normally do diet. But I told him to bring me a real Dr. Pepper and a spicy chicken sandwich. And they walked a lap with me after I sat down with them a little bit and ate it. And man, I will never forget that Dr. Pepper. It was cold in the middle of the afternoon and pure sugar and caffeine. It was amazing. But anyway, as far as the details of the 100 miler, I think this video is getting kind of long. I will have a add-on video to tell you more about how that went, and I will go mile by mile. If you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Like, share, and subscribe, in fact, so that the algorithm can figure out I'm actually a nice person and recommend me to other people. So if you enjoyed that video, please take 2 seconds to do that. I'd really, really appreciate it. And if you are interested in how the 100 miler went, stick around. I'd love to have you join. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.